Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar, Street Outreach and Law Enforcement Collaboration, Prioritizing Safety When Working with Gang Members. My name is Carissa Rano, and I'm with the OJDP National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of Adobe Connect, which will help you maximize the opportunity to participate in today's webinar. To download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, locate the handout pod directly above the chat area. Click on the name of the file and then click the download button. To send a chat message, type your message into the text box. Hit enter or click the message bubble icon to send. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute and help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. This will help us with our final count. Again, if you are viewing with a larger group, please type in the number of additional people joining you today. If you are participating by yourself, please do not enter anything at this time. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar today. During that time, presenters will take the opportunity to address some of the questions you have posed during the presentation. Type your questions into the chat box as they arise. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided with a link to take a 5-minute online survey about today's presentation. We appreciate your feedback regarding this webinar. This information is used to assist in future planning and training. You'll be able to access the evaluation link on the left side of the PowerPoint. Finally, this event will be archived in OJDP's online university at www.ntac.org in approximately 3 weeks. You can also check out past webinars that have been archived in the online university. Again, thank you for joining us today. I will now turn it over to Mina Harris, the National Gang Center, to begin today's webinar.
Thank you for joining our webinar, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about the National Gang Center, and then we will turn it over to our speakers in Houston to talk about the role of street outreach and law enforcement and how they conduct their projects. So the National Gang Center is a federal resource project jointly funded by the Department of Justice's Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention and by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The National Gang Center serves to assist policymakers, criminal justice practitioners, educators, law enforcement, those who work in gang prevention, intervention, and reentry, and other community members to navigate through the extensive range of research and program information that address gang violence and its consequences. The center provides information, tools, and technical assistance to support communities as they work to develop sustainable solutions to street gang violence. Before I talk a little bit about what's on our website and what we do, we'd like to ask a poll question on how many people are familiar with the National Gang Center and their website. Okay, so that's good to see. So let me talk just a little bit of about our products. The Gang Center receives many requests for information and assistance from which we can be answered through the information found on the website. Some of the products that you can find on our website include gang-related news. This gives people a way to stay current via open-source gang-related news articles that make headlines in their state and nationwide. The Gang Center publishes a newsletter, which includes informative articles on emerging gang issues, examples of community-based gang strategies, and current research in the field. And also available for download are our Parents' Guide to Gangs, which is a very popular brochure. Also available is a video, Why Youth Join Gangs, which features gang researchers, practitioners, and young people who were previously involved in gangs, all of whom talk about gang joining from their perspective. A useful form of communication is our Gang Info Exchange. This is an online moderated email discussion group that is open to people who work in the fields of criminal justice, education, research, and social services, all related to gang prevention, intervention, suppression, and reentry. So besides what you can find on our website. The Gang Center provides on- and off-site technical assistance to communities who are ready to implement comprehensive community-based gang reduction initiatives, which include gang prevention, gang intervention, gang suppression, reentry, those programs, practices, and strategies. Additionally, the Gang Center offers specialized training for law enforcement. So if you're not already familiar with it, I encourage you to visit our website and contact us with questions or provide us feedback on our website. The Gang Center is a resource for you. So before I start, I want to do two things. I want to ask you a couple more questions about who you are and where you're from, and then I want to talk just a little bit about our speakers in Houston. So why don't we load up those poll questions. The first one is what line of work, what field of work? And this will help us, help our Houston speakers figure out who our audience is. So we keep getting more. And Carissa, you can turn this off and go to the next one when you see that. Oh, can people see the results? I see that there's a lot of law enforcement on there. Okay. And juvenile justice. Okay, so why don't we go up to the next question? How many years of experience do you have working gangs or working with gang-involved individuals? So far, 1 to 3 years. 11 to 15 years are our highest. And the numbers keep rising. Okay, let's go to our next question. Are you or have you ever been a street gang outreach worker? Okay, very interesting. Most of you online have not. That's good to know. And I believe we have one more question. Where are you located? What region of the country are you located? Shout out to a lot of people from the Northeast. Maybe it's too early for the people in the West. Awesome, thank you. I see your chats also telling us where you're from. Thank you very much. Okay, let me go back to introducing the speakers. Now, the National Gang Center looks for local gang reduction initiatives that provide both research-based and practically informed evidence of success. We look for projects that base their efforts on data-driven programming, on the level of community involvement, on how well the project connects with youth and other gang-involved individuals. Collaboration and coordination are buzzwords that we all often hear, but keys for success include substantive relationship building, not only at the direct service level, but among the stakeholder individuals, agencies, and organizations involved. Substantive relationships and partnerships are the foundation of appropriate information sharing that leads to effective coordination of services, and in turn should lead to improved outcomes for public safety and thriving communities. So in the year 2000, the City of Houston received an Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Gang-Free Schools demonstration project, working in close coordination with the National Gang Center technical assistance staff. The Houston project, they convened community leaders as a steering committee under this project in order to conduct a comprehensive assessment of local gang-related crimes and other gang-related issues. They used the data and assessment findings to create an action plan that fit the local gang-related situation in Houston. Their strategic action plan focused on specific geographical areas based on the initial assessment work. As a core component of the project, the most active gang-involved youth were targeted for intervention. The Houston Project, over the years, coordinated and reallocated existing resources and developed new resources to create opportunities for their client population. They created a multidisciplinary intervention team to provide case management around their clients. Law enforcement had a role to play in all aspects of this project. The project is currently sustained with local funding. So as you listen to our speakers relate the narrative of what they do now to address violent incidents on the street, realize that these relationships between law enforcement and street outreach did not happen instantaneously. It took some time to develop trust in both directions. Houston's Gang Reduction Initiative is an excellent example of how it can be done. So now I turn it over to Patricia Harrington.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Houston, Texas. Again, I'm Patricia Harrington. I'm the director here at the Mayor's Anti-Gang Office. Just to give you a little bit of background about the office, we were created in 1994. Houston had experienced some pretty violent gang-related crimes at that point, so our mayor and chief of police created divisional gang units and gang task forces for the patrol commands. But the mayor also felt that we needed to work on addressing causes and issues that young people were facing that were causing them to turn to gangs. So in the beginning, what we did was a lot of coordination of youth service providers and trying to get them to create and implement gang prevention programs. And it went really good for a while. We were very happy with it. Prevention is very key to a good strategy. But at some point, one of the things we were really focusing on was educating and training. So that would be the service providers who worked in the agencies, schools, parents, lots of folks training on how to identify potential gang behavior at their schools and their communities and within their families. So from that, what we realized was that we were training a lot of people how to identify it, but then we didn't have the next step, which was how we were going to help those folks intervene once they had identified that their student or their client or their son or their daughter may have been gang involved. So we started to turn our focus towards gang intervention, which is, you know, now I know that this young man or woman is in the gang, what kinds of intervention services might they need to help them leave the gang or reduce the gang lifestyle. So that's a little bit of the history of the office. And so since that time, what we have done is we've created a lot of different comprehensive services and programming. So we really focus a lot on gang intervention. We use a social work case management model for that Victor's going to talk about in a little bit. But what we really try to do, what we mean by that is we assess a young person, we assess the youth, how involved in a gang they are they really gang involved, you know, what circumstances are going on with them in their home and their school and their family personally, what kinds of individual risk factors are they displaying. And then what we do is we link them to services. So we set up service plans for them with short and long-term goals that they can achieve. That can be things like getting a GED, getting tutoring, you know, tattoo removal, maybe they need workforce development skills, just a whole host of skills that they may need. And so we link them to service agencies to provide those types of services. So that is the main focus of what we're doing here at the Anti-Gang Office. But we also do other things. We work a lot with probation and parole, so we do diversion. We also want to look at early entry of young folks into the justice system. We have great information and sharing teams, which is going to be a big crux of what we're going to talk about today that Vic's going to go over with Sergeant Ponder. And we do a lot of public awareness. Probably, you know, our staff is out every day doing at least 1 or 2 presentations a day to young people on dangers and consequences, to stakeholders, on how to identify warning signs. So lots and lots of public awareness and presentations. We also work with adult probation, adult parole. So we don't just work with juveniles, and we don't just work with gang members. That's our niche. But we do work with adult populations as well. And then what we have been focusing here lately is on some prevention and alternative activities. So when Mina mentioned how we really base a lot of the development of our programs and services on the comprehensive gang model, we were a demonstration site. We worked on the project for about 2.5, almost 3 years. We really learned a lot from that, and I think, we were kind of surprised. We were somewhat doing a little bit already of some of the components of the model and the strategy. It just gave us the structure and affirmation of what we had been doing prior to that, and it really helped us give us some focus. Go next slide. So one of the things that we really, when we try to put I guess the intervention teams, which again Vic's going to talk about, for us that's really been a major component and something that has been able to last, that we've been able to pull from using the model. Information sharing and collaborating and coordination, we just really couldn't run our office, I don't think, as effectively as we do if we did not have these partnerships that have been created over the years. So, suppression alone is not going to control a gang problem. That's our very first bullet here on the slide. And, we do it because we know young people, they can leave the gang lifestyle. They can be prevented from joining. Once they are in, they can leave it. We have had many success stories of young people who have left. Everyone needs to be aware of gang activity. I think when we were in the beginning of the model, what we noticed was that there was quite an underreporting of gang members and gang crime, which meant that, in our law enforcement agency in the Houston Police Department, a lot of things that could have been and should have been probably attributed to gang crime, it wasn't really being captured that way. And so through our process, we went through some organizational change and development through that, and then we were able to tell that, in some areas where we didn't think we had a really big gang problem, we did. But then that helped us develop the strategies that we needed to put in place to address those. And I think Houston has been really at the forefront of being able to address it using, community impact data and this cross-training and coordination and collaboration, not just amongst service agencies like ours, but as Mina mentioned, law enforcement has been critical, and they've been a great partner to us. They've really, really embraced the strategy overall the Houston Police Department has, and the other law enforcement agencies, the Harris County Sheriff's Office, the Independent School District Police Departments, the constables. Houston, we have, in Harris County, we have multiple law enforcement agencies in our area that we have been able to organize. And then finally, it's very important, we believe, that I think this is one of the strengths that the team-based interventions have helped us identify, is that, in a neighborhood or a community, service providers, they really know what is going on with the people who live in their communities. They know the types of issues and problems that they are bringing to their agencies, the type of assistance that they're asking for, and all of that information can be very helpful to law enforcement when we're working on strategies to deter or even solve particular cases. So now I'm going to turn it over to Victor. He is our Director of Program Services. He manages our gang intervention team, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the team-based gang intervention model that we use.
Hello, everybody. Before I started to, when I got involved with the office, I had come from the nonprofit sector, so I was community agency driven. It was about being in the community, working with the kids in gangs. It was behind the substance abuse spin. We were addressing substance abuse issues, but we noticed we had a lot of gang members in that community that I was working in. And when I came in contact with the office, the Mayor's Anti-Gang Office, I decided to jump on board with them. When I saw the model for the first time, I think the biggest thing to me was, this is too big of an animal to wrap my head around. I'm just trying to provide services to kids in gangs. And so what I got from the model, and I really want to stress today, is this component from the model, the team-based gang intervention, the multidisciplinary team. It's been something that when I was doing this work, being an outreach worker, you can feel like you're kind of in a lonely world trying to do a lot of things with a lot of kids, and sometimes you don't have enough time or resources, and you can drive yourself a little nuts, trying to do everything you can to help the kids, because you always want the best for them. But once I started to understand what this concept was about, when we're bringing everybody together to case manage several clients from one target area that are or from the gangs that are causing the most issues in a given community, a target area, it makes things a whole lot easier to provide the services that need to be rendered to these kids. Because at the end of the day, there's a whole lot of us that are involved with them already. It isn't until you come together that you realize when you're trying to put a case management plan together for them as a team, you start realizing they're in other systems. They're in CPS. They might be involved in a drug rehab program or were there once before, or they've been to the workforce employment agency in that community. And one of the things that was really fascinating about sitting down with this was that there was a lot of people that didn't understand a lot about what was going on in their respected agencies. I think when we talk about gangs, we always talk about enforcement, that police are always brought in on this from the very jump. You have a gang issue, bring police to the table. And I'm one of those firm believers now involving myself in the model that it allows you to be able to talk a lot about what's happening in that one community with that one set of gangs that we're dealing with. And that one community, when we first started, we were talking about 16 gangs. After we did all the statistical data and we pulled everything, you narrowed that down to 8. And once you narrowed it down to 8, then you could start to see what was really going on. So we also did that with the clients' profiles, what we were learning from the kids in that area. So when we start talking about how we're going to assist, this thing starts to drive you into some of the focused enforcement activities. And then at the same time, we want to hold the clients accountable. And then really a lot of times the second half of this meeting, we get into the gangs in the target area, some of the trends, some of the alliances, some of the rivals. Some of the things that are going on with the rivalries in the community, we're all on one page. Without this process, it's made it really hard for me to do things at a large scale here in our city to keep up with what's going on being so big. So it's a huge piece, and it's something that we need to really pay attention to if we're trying to move forward. Moving on to the next slide. I guess for us here, a little bit more about how these efforts help address it. I think sometimes when information is shared, it's a little easier to start to create some strategies, and sometimes you can put your personnel to that strategy. I think sometimes it takes some direction from somebody to be able to put that out there, because we can say we have all these problematic gangs and gang members, but if we're not putting anything to work it effectively, then it's kind of hard to do anything in any given community. Everybody kind of does their own thing, and we're out there running with our chicken, like a chicken with no head sometimes. And so when you're talking about trying to provide the resources and the opportunities to deter gang involvement, you have to have a really good idea of what you're working with, because at the end of the day, if we've got probation kids, if we've got parole kids, we're trying to reduce that recidivism. We're trying to build capacity in the community within the agencies. Lots of times we run across agencies that are scared to work with our population. We have to do training with them. One of the biggest deals we had here in Houston was employment. Well, Victor, that's all good. We can give them employment, but they're not ready for this. They're not ready for that. Can you train us on what the tattoos mean, what the colors mean, what's the rivalries, what's happening in this community? And once we started to do that, we're able to break down some barriers. But I think once everybody kind of puts their stuff together and we start to really identify what the role is, how we're gonna roll this strategy out, and both helping the kids in the community, it makes sense, a little more sense about how we're going to address it in any given community through these team-based efforts. I think one of the key elements when we talk about outreach, and I come from outreach, so my heart is in outreach. I've learned over the years how to kind of utilize an outreach person along with probation, along with parole, along with law enforcement, where it can be a real fine line. And so one of the things that I have to really keep in mind with the staff that we have here is how I supervise them, on the direction that I'm giving them on how to work with our clients. Some of the team members that we may have on our teams, we call them gang violence reduction teams here in Houston, and some of the stakeholders. It's a monthly meeting that we meet every week to discuss what's going on with the kids, the progress or lack thereof. But it's really one of those things that as a supervisor, I have to really understand what's going on in that community to be able to articulate the dynamics and and guide the team to developing prevention and intervention strategies. We're doing it all together, but I think sometimes, I find myself over the years, when you're in this stuff, sometimes because people may not have as much experience with it, once we start to guide and give direction, it makes things a little bit easier. Being able to have a good working relationship or knowledge of these agencies and their systems certainly helps. Because if you can just talk a little bit about what's going on in their world, or you can kind of see what's happening, it makes it a little bit easier for me to explain that to my outreach workers who sometimes don't get it. Vic, why am I sitting in this meeting with this police officer? I don't like them. They don't like me. And already I'm having to break down barriers about, look, this is how this is going to roll out. This is how we're going to do this. I have to explain to them exactly what's going on. So that person has to be able to coordinate the various team members. You're going to have to troubleshoot on occasions. There's some things may be going on in a meeting, and you're going to have to pick it up or recognize it and determine, do I deal with it right there and then with my outreach worker, or do I have to do something a little bit different with that team member and wait till after the meeting? But somebody has to be able to resolve the issues, and somebody's going to have a lot of good judgment, some patience. You can't get overly emotional. Good interpersonal skills really help to be able to get this thing where it needs to be, especially from the outreach worker side. Here, I just happen to do a little bit of both. I kind of do the outreach worker, and then the gang violence reduction teams, I coordinate and manage those as well, and that's where I have to get involved with the other systems like police, like probation, like schools and their administrators, or even their independent school district police officers. So it takes a person that really has to be able to understand what's going on so you get the best guidance to your outreach workers.
Yeah, I do want to follow up a little bit on that, in that I would say out of the model, the intervention teams are, that's something we have really, really embraced, and Victor has 5 of those teams throughout the city of Houston. But you do, and they're very, very helpful, and we're going to talk about why in a second too, but you really do have to have a very good, strong leader of that team. There's no point in trying to start an intervention team unless you have a very good leader for it.
It will stall. It will stall if we don't have good leadership. We've got to be able to, everybody's got to pull together and buy in. It will stall. When we get to the actual outreach workers, if you're out there, with this model and this process, you have to be very patient. You have to really put down your barriers, your wall just a little bit when we start talking about law enforcement, because it's very touchy. We're on that one side to help. We're recruiting the kids. We're out there in the outreach. We're trying to link these kids to the services and try to be that liaison that goes between these services to kind of help the kids understand what they're going through. A lot of hand-holding. But you have to remember that when we're sitting on this team, we have to have an open mind. And we'll get more into trust and establishing that later. But I think one of the biggest things is to remember what you're doing as a gang outreach worker. You're conducting that home visit. You're out at the schools. If you have to make a visit to the jails, to the detention centers, it's one of those things that, without you cannot represent your client in this intervention team. Sometimes people need to understand the kids a lot better, and you're responsible for shedding light on what's going on with that young person and their family. What's really going on behind the scenes? Why did these kids join these gangs? So you have to kind of be that representative for that person. Sometimes you're resolving conflicts, not just amongst kids that are in gangs with their rivals. Sometimes there's beef with their family. Sometimes there's things going on with their brothers and sisters, and we have to work those things out. And so sometimes you're going to get involved in those violent episodes in the community at home. I've seen things get violent with the family just as bad as they did on the streets. So it's one of those things as an outreach worker, we have to remember the role that we play and how important it is. To me, in this process, you are the heart, you're the eyes, you're the ears, you're very important to this process. And if you're new to this, I really encourage you to really pay attention to what your role is and stay in it. Because when you're out there talking in the community and you're conducting presentations and you're shedding light on the gang lifestyle, when you're the one that's putting out activities for kids that sometimes don't want to deal with, you're a very valuable part to this process. So for the outreach worker, remember, you're very valuable. Keep an open mind. We don't know everything because we think we can. When this model first came here, they put it in my neighborhood where I grew up. I knew everybody and everything, believe that. But when it came to the foundation and the baseline of the model and the process, after a little while, I had to shut up and take a back seat. I had to really learn and see how could I make it work for me.
Hey guys, hey, this is Sergeant Ponder. On this next slide, I'm going to speak, and pretty much it says law enforcement and criminal justice personnel. Basically, it says, report the team on gang climate and trends, provide input on issues, provide information on criminal involvement, and share information. Basically, it's simple. These guys, it's real simple for law enforcement. There's a meeting once a month, and at this table of meeting are law enforcement, school personnel, probation personnel, outreach workers. And all these guys have information on gang members in your area you're policing. All these people get information from these kids on shootings, on crimes, on everything. And for law enforcement, all we have to do is attend this meeting and participate. And I know as cops, everybody thinks, we know everything and that's all we need, but that's not the case. I can't tell you how much information I've got from going to these meetings. And they hear about, shooting happens, the night before. Immediately, these kids on the street are talking. Who are they talking to? The school officials, their probation officers, and that information, and they have information that we need. And I know it's a little weird. Most important thing is keeping an open mind about the process. It's kind of a little out of the norm for police officers. We only deal with other officers and stuff like that. But I tell you what, I've been participating in this for 10 years now. I think it is. I don't know. And I consider Victor a friend. Victor, runs the organization here in Houston, and all the people on his team, I consider them friends. And once you establish some kind of relationship, I mean, it works out really good.
I think what's really important for me when I have a police officer at the table is he going to be bought in? Is he going to buy in enough to be able to share what he knows about the trends, about the activity? Is he going to be able to talk about some of the things that he may be running across that it could affect some of the clients that we're dealing with that's on our team? Sometimes these officers, they run across our kids at nighttime, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and they're able to bring some of that stuff back to the meeting. Sometimes they'll share. There's certainly a line that we have to keep as law enforcement and criminal justice. But I think at the end of the day, what we've learned in our process in dealing with law enforcement is that at the end of the day, we're trying to keep everybody safe. So if it's a safety concern, that kind of confidentiality, we're going to test that a little bit because we have to share the information about what's going on in the community that could become retaliatory. We could have retaliation after retaliation, and we're going to cover a few cases at the very end where there was a lot of that was going on. Had we not been talking, it would have made things a whole lot worse. So with police being there and having an open mind and playing your role, it's really helpful that you can bring these things to the table because you're just another set of eyes, and who's going to run into some of the most active gang members on the street in that target area but a police officer? So if we have somebody in the gang unit that's really gun-ho and really understands the process, it makes it a lot easier for law enforcement to engage and stay in their role.
The next slide talks about how police officers help. It talks about being proactive, not just reactive. It talks about actively participating in the partnership team, sharing gang information. Some of the stuff we already talked about. And what happens is, guys, our role in this whole situation is really limited. It really is. We just got to participate. Like I said, we develop relationships. We talk about recent shootings that occurred, and what happens is these outreach workers are on the streets, and they'll start preventing a lot of these shootings. We get information that Gang X is targeting Gang Y, and they're out there already talking to their kids about not retaliating, about the consequences, and so forth. So it deters crime that way. Also, too, we'll get information. I'll get information maybe from a probation officer. Hey, little Billy, I did a home visit the other day. Little Billy's got a gun in his room. Oh, really? Well, you know what? Next week, I'm going to go with that probation officer, and we'll do a home visit, and I'll get that gun from little Billy, and then I'll save little Billy from going to committing a shooting. Little stuff like that, and it's all about just being part of this process and how being not just police officers solving crime, it's everybody in the community. It's the outreach workers, it's the probation officers, it's the school officials, because everybody has something to offer. And if you all participate, it'll help the community in general. You know what? Patrol officers get tired of doing all these drive-by shooting calls. They get tired of doing all these robbery calls or all these DMV calls, these little gang members committing crimes. Well, you know what? If we all work together we can keep them from committing crime, you know, and that's all part of it. That's all how we help. And what I found out attending these meetings is these outreach workers, they know more about gangs in the area than many policemen do. I mean, I tell you what, you know, we start talking about recent activity, what's going on. You know, they'll tell you, yeah, I was up at the school the other day and I saw such and such hanging out. You know, they know more than a lot of cops do. And once you figure that out, we can all work together to make everybody's job a lot easier. You know, people think I got a pretty good reputation here in the police department. I'm a good policeman. I know all this stuff. Well, truth of the matter is, I know a little, but I know the right people to ask. You know, drive-by shooting occurs, and you know they drop in, you know, in homicides they're doing an interview, and you know, little Speedy's supposed to be the shooter. Well, I don't know who little Speedy is. And next thing I'll do, I'll text to my people, my outreach workers, my probation officers, the guys that I've met in these meetings, the relationship that I have, and sure enough, 5 minutes later, I'll get a real name of little Speedy. That's just an example. But and also too, what's also important, I know with the police departments there's always change. And HPD, we've been fighting it for a long time, and right now finally HPD's finally come to understanding that hey, we have a gang issue, we have gang problems. Let's put some resources, let's develop it, just kind of like Chris was talking about. And I know there's always stuff changing. I know a lot of higher ups like a lot of this stuff as far as working with the community and stuff like that. So this could be just another avenue to keep your gang unit afloat, to keep your department working gangs, to talk about a program like this.
On this next slide, and it's very important that we have the police department there. So being able to, again, have that open mind and being able to sit at this table, this is kind of the diagram that we use just to kind of give you an idea of who's at the table, and we're targeting the gang members. There's a lot of different people, and without law enforcement, we can't really do much. Without probation there, without the social services, you can see from the diagram that it's a huge team effort, and we all have to be willing to play ball together. And when you're in this process, it just takes a little while. So when we talk about building the relationship between members, ain't gonna lie, it takes a little bit. We've been at it for a while here in Houston. But if I had to take the number one or the top three in this, I think trust, commitment, and communication are the ones that strike me the most. I mean, because you have to commit, and then once you're in, you got to communicate. And once we're communicating, we've got to be able to build that trust. And it's not easy when we're on different sides of the pendulum. So if you have somebody that is gang involved, and you know, we're working with one kid and the outreach workers advocating, and the police department is saying, well, he's doing X, Y, Z on the street. And then you have a probation officer who's saying, well, you know, he's reporting, he's doing this, he's doing that, everything's good. Sometimes that can cause some issues, and we can disrespect each other's role and profession. And so sometimes we've got to work through those challenges when we're in this meeting. And so the willingness to listen to everybody's opinion or everybody's information and everything that they have going on with the clients is really important, that it's being heard. Because if you're coming in with an ego, if you're going to come in trying to dominate, or you're going to try to roll off your agenda in this meeting, for me, I will shut it down, because it's not about that. For me, as the coordinator, I have to make sure that the relationship builds. And so when I'm looking to put a gang violence reduction team meeting together, I do about 6 months of work, of legwork. But because I've been in the city so long, I know quite a few people. It's a little easier for me to be able to get people to buy in, because they trust what we're trying to do here, to help the kids, as many as we can, and then and just make the community as safe as we can make it. It makes it a little easier for me to put it together, actually do the training, get it up and running, and move forward. But in the beginning, it's really, really difficult to get people. So training on the model and the intervention team is huge, so they have an understanding of what the role is. And so once you get through that, I think the relationship building process really allows you to have a good flow. Now, there's always going to be some questions. My outreach workers, you know, every time we get a new officer, they're like, hey, Vic, before the meeting, man, let's talk. You know, or sometimes I know there's new officers. I've got to go make conversation with the new officers. You know, your sergeant sends you, you know, I didn't know who you were. And we have to build those relationships a little bit. So it's one of those things that when we're working through this process, it takes a lot of work. It really takes a lot of work. The coordinator has to do a real good job of really understanding what everybody's about. Once you get into this process, I always encourage to have some policies and procedures. I'm not going to go too much into it, but every agency has their own policies and procedures with confidentiality, and we follow those to the T, and where we can test the line and press the line, we do that. But we kind of create that information sharing process amongst ourselves in the meeting. We're educating partners about information sharing limitation because everybody has one. At the end of the day, we're going to do the best we can to protect confidentiality. But when we're talking about safety, we're talking about a shooting, we're talking about a hit, we're talking about somebody's house getting shot up. At the end of the day, if there's information that's going on that can prevent that, and we can show how we can collaborate and how we can do what we need to do to share the resources, then we do the best we can with that. Because at the end of the day, if we're disrespecting and we're not really working towards the common goal, then it's really hard to get anything done if you're not working together. So developing policy procedures, you got to have them so that there's no I didn't know, or you didn't tell me that, or you should have said that. And we kind of take care of that all up front and develop the policies and procedures.
I think I want to say something real quick too here that I don't know if we touched on this, but I think one of the things that it has also helped us with is it has helped folks who work in other disciplines understand each other's capacity, what they could do, what they couldn't do, how their systems worked. I think Clinton and I were talking about this the other day, was that, he didn't really have a full understanding of how the court system worked or how the probation or parole system worked. And so when he was expecting certain things to happen with a kid who was on probation or parole, and then he was wondering, well, why isn't this happening? The fact that he was able to come to the meetings and meet those parole and probation officers that would then explain their process to him, then he knew better how to work with them instead of just sort of sitting there saying, well, why aren't they doing their job? So I think that really helped him a lot as well.
Yeah, Trish, you're 100% right. It made me just a better officer. I know what everybody does. I know what a probation officer does. I know what outreach worker does. I know the obstacles assistant principals at schools have to do with their administrative staff. I know more about what the ISD officers have to do with their fight between their chief of police and their principal at the school that they're working at. Who do they see to? So yeah, it made me such a better officer. And just touch back on Vic said a little bit more. And it should go without saying. You attend these meetings, and I hear information about such and such a drive-by shooting or such had a gun. I never put that in an offense report. These are just information I hear, and it's me as an officer. I have to do my work. It points me in the right direction on a suspect on who to go look for or who to target or whatever like that. But I never put that in an offense report, obviously, because that'll just break down everything right there. It'll put these guys are not policemen. These outreach workers are not policemen. They're going in and out of these schools, in and out of these kids' homes. They're meeting the families. They're meeting the kids, and they get a lot of information. But we can't break that trust, and so I never receive information. I never put that in an offense report on where I got the information from.
I think it goes back to, people have the tendency, I know I did, when I first started doing this work, okay, you want me to be in this model, but you want me to snitch. Well, at the end of the day, if you're an outreach worker, you shouldn't be digging for stuff that's going to get you in a court document or in front of the judge. You should be able to have that line. That boundary needs to be set with the kids from the beginning, because if not, yeah, you're going to look like one. And even when you first do this outreach work anyway and you're out there on the streets, if, some of the gangs, they're always going to be suspicious. It isn't until you do what you're supposed to do, staying in your role and sticking to what you said you were going to do as an outreach worker and not trying to be a police officer, you're going to be okay in that regard. And you're not going to be looked at as an informant. But I think one of the things that starts to happen is we have to understand, just like police has had to understand other agencies, we also as outreach workers have to understand that you cannot disrupt police investigations. If you're getting involved in that, you're going to get pulled in. It's just automatic, and nothing worse can happen to an outreach component if they think that you're out there doing some work that's not necessary. There's always ways when you're at the line and you're about to cross it that you could come back and still clean things up, because at the end of the day, you stay true to what you're supposed to do, and that's help the kids get back on track. But when we're in this meeting, you can test the line. And I kind of go with this, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas concept, because you can't burn folks. And at the end of the day, it's rumor anyway. We're dealing with kids right now. They're here now. They're at an activity right now here in Houston. They're in spring break. And I've got a couple of kids that are suspects as shooters because we keep hearing their name pop up. But I don't know if that's true. But at the end of the day, it's there. So we have to keep working with it as best we can with the time that we do have when it comes to the kids that we're dealing with. Some of the situations that we run across and that we've run across here, I'm going to move a little quick because I want to get to the case scenarios, but I think it was important to highlight some of the things that we run across, from a gang hit to some dangerous situations that could be in the field. If you're conducting services, there's times where things get so bad and we have to make sure that our team members are maybe adjusting what time they go visit their kids. Maybe a night visit is not the best place at their home. Maybe we got to bring them to a probation office. Maybe we have to do something a little bit different to make sure that everybody's staying safe. And certainly if the kid's a target, don't ask them to catch the bus. Don't ask them to get on the bus and ride to 2 or 3 territories to try to get to your probation meeting, to your workshop, to your community service. See, there's a lot of little things that go by because at any given time, these kids that are involved in gangs, they're going to be in the mix somehow, some way, whether they're a suspect or where they could be a potential victim for retaliation of some sort. They could be set up for a verbal threat, a physical threat, where they're getting jumped by rival gangs. So it's one of those things that we have to be ready to work with. There's a lot of times where my staff is putting out fires and we're doing small mediations. And then there's times where probation may bring something to the table that's really serious and we got to pull everybody together, all hands on deck. We got to get this kid out of the house. We got to move him to a facility with probation. There's a lot of factors that come into play that we have to just move all the moving parts, and you have to move together. Because at the end of the day, everybody has a little bit of everything when it comes to gang violence in any given community or at a school, that it's important to share that. Because at the end of the day, we don't want anybody hurt. I especially don't want to see a kid get hit that doesn't need to get hit, and I certainly don't want anybody else to get shot that's part of our team. So, for the sake of time, we kind of thought maybe it was important to kind of lay a scenario out. Right now we're going through a lot of situations in our city and one part of the town, in the southwest part of Houston, involving one of our gangs called the Southwest Cholos, one of our largest gangs in the city, have been here for a long time, and to me, the new MS. We've had MS here for a while, but I think there's some new players in town. It's pretty obvious. And so what I'd like to do is let Ponder kind of open it up and kind of give us just a brief timeline of what we're dealing with, and then I'll get more into the meat of what some of the strategies we had to create to make some things very safe for our clients, families, and some of our workers on our team.
Yeah, since October here in Southwest Houston, there's like a little 3-mile radius. Since October, we've had 11 homicides and another 17, 18 or so shootings related between MS and Southwest Cholos shooting at one another. And we as law enforcement, we get the case. A guy was murdered last night, a guy was shot last night. We go in there, we start talking to complainants again. We start talking to witnesses. We start looking for video evidence and all that type of stuff, right? And that's kind of how we work cases. Well, the underlying stuff is these kids, if it's gang related, these kids are all talking and stuff like that. So when I get a shooting, I get a homicide, anything that occurs, I'm texting Vic, I'm texting his fellow team members, outreach workers. I'm letting them know, hey, by the way, there was a shooting last night. Hey, here's what happened, and I lay it out to them. And because what happens is the next morning when these kids, these social workers, outreach workers start hitting those school campuses, these kids are talking. Everybody's talking, and we need any information we can on these cases. And it's what we do I've been doing this for years over here, and like I said, here recently we had a whole bunch of homicides. And what happens is we're all just sharing information back and forth. And what will happen is too, because obviously MS will kill a Southwest Cholo on one night, then now the Cholos are all hyped up, wanting to go out and do retaliation shooting. And so these outreach workers, they get out there, they get to these schools, these kids in the schools, and they will start helping prevent some of these shootings. I mean, right now we've had a lot of homicides, we've had a lot of shootings. There's no doubt about it. But no telling how much more we would have had if these outreach workers weren't out there. And
so we had this one situation Thanksgiving night. We had a young man that got killed. We've been trying to reach out to him. We were looking for him. He took 6 or 7 bullets. I mean, straight up hit. MS took him out. Had another kid with him. He became one of the clients. We've been meeting these guys during some outreach in the community, so we knew who they were. The shooting started to take place. We started hearing about a bunch of kids that are involved on all sides. I called a small meeting with law enforcement. Look, these are some names that we know that are out there. They're active. They're up and coming. And it was amazing because of the names that I gave, half this list left in less than a week. They were either suspects, they were victims, they were killed, they were arrested, or they're being investigated. And I think lots of times with law enforcement, if you're not paying attention to the juveniles that are coming up behind you and you're always concentrating on the older kids, you can miss a lot of stuff. And when we start talking about a series of shootings within 2 or 3 days of each other, we had one kid that was texting us from the hospital. We worked with the hospital. We worked with a social worker. There was a youth ministry, a church was there that was involved. We were able to relocate that family, get that family out. In that process, we learned that the kid was being abused, and his family they were being beat up, seriously by the dad. And so in that situation, from an outreach worker to go over there alone, not happening. Because we had a relationship with the gang unit in that particular area, they were able to help us with security to remove the family and get that family out of there. Not only that, the kid that we were removing from had been shot. It was retaliation behind some of these shootings, and MS shot at him, and they hit him in the leg. He was like, look, I'll talk to police. I don't care, but I don't trust them. So we're being able to have a relationship with the officers to make sure that they're treated right, they're treated fairly, and that they're able to just give the information was huge. And we're able to make that connection. We move the family out. The family's doing well. They're working. They're doing some great things. So with that and being involved in the schools, we've pulled other kids. I have another 3 of them here today. So it's one of those things where the kids make their own moves, but when they start to see incidents between these two gangs where it's just random hits, they're planned, they're organized, and they're deliberate. It's no doubt about it. But you have to be able to, in that situation, we've got to move really fast, really quick. Can't do that without a team. In my northwest part of the city, we had a situation where the gang unit came and reached out to me and said, look, this house, we had a house of a family that we were dealing with, had been shot up 4 or 5 times in 1 month. The family put up some cameras. They finally got a good look at who did it. My outreach folks, we understood who it was. We had an idea of who it was. We didn't know exactly who it was, but we had an idea of what gang it was because they were cranking things up on the street. But at the same time, why are they shooting at this house? These brothers are doing some things, and what ends up happening in this situation, gang unit gets some intel. They say, Vic, they got a hit out on this kid. They've already shot the house up 5 times. The next thing I'm worried about is somebody kicking the door down and taking everybody out that's in this house. We got to remove the kid. Isn't he on probation? Yes, he is. We get with the probation officer. We work it out. We remove the kid. He was going to be violated anyway. We just speeded up the process because he wasn't reporting. He was, not following his drug. He was failing his drug screens, not violating curfew. He wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. It was just going to be a matter of time. So instead of letting this hit take out, if it was legit or not, who knows, we removed him, and he ended up doing some time. And unfortunately, that kid now, he just signed for 12 years about 2 years ago. But this other kid that was a suspect, mind you, they arrested him. And I knew him. And we'll just call him Little Happy. So I knew him, and plain as day, he's on this video that the family set up where the family had set up the cameras, and he comes out and just blasts away with a shotgun. And we know the kid. And long story short, we ended up getting that kid on probation. They gave him his consequence. He came our way. The kid is doing great. He's working. He got away from that. He actually had a hit out on him, and we had to work with the school PD. We had to work with the gang unit in that particular side of town just to make sure that the hit didn't get carried out. And then we had to help the family move to another location. And this is where we're having to deal with apartment managers and folks to understand a little bit more about why we're having to move this kid so fast. And how important it is to get him out of the dangerous situation that he was in, that him and his family were in. So at the end of the day, when you start talking about having to do what we can to get these things going, I think it's real important that you remember when these situations go down, you can't do it by yourself. You're going to need a lot of help from a lot of people. There's a lot of moving parts. But at the end of the day, if we're not working towards reducing the gang crime in that community, keep trying to do it by yourself. Police, you can't arrest your way out of it. Outreach workers, I don't care if you're an ex-gang member, the best social worker in the world, and you got resources, at the end of the day, you can't do this by yourself either. Probation is only going to have so much room in the detention centers. The criminal courts are going to get backed up. At some point, we got to do what we got to do to be able to impact some of the change with these clients, and you have to be able to pull all the levers when they need to be pulled, and everybody needs to be playing ball. Because at the end of the day, if we're not confident in what we're doing, if we're not feeling safe, if our families are not feeling that same approach when we're interacting with them, then I'll tell you, you're not going to be very effective. It takes a lot of work to be able to get to this point, so by no means am I saying in the next 6 months you'll be up and running. It takes a while. But I think at the end of the day, we want to treat each other with respect. And I think when you have that, and you have the trust, you have the dedication, you have the commitment, you're always going to be watching out for each other to make sure that they're doing their job the best way they can in the safest manner that we can, and that we're doing everything we can to help the kids, even when they're having a hard time and struggling. We do everything we can to be successful in these meetings, but some kids are just going to make their bed, they're going to take a time out, they're going to do what they got to do, and some kids die. I mean, that kid that got killed Thanksgiving, we were looking for him. Mina Harris was with us from the gang center. We were looking for him Tuesday, and he died Thursday. So it's one of those things that we're looking at, that sometimes when you're doing this work, there's some disappointment. There's a lot of disappointment with these kids. But when you do get over the hump and everybody does come together and you feel the success together, when you see kids completing probation, getting jobs, taking off their tattoos, taking care of their kids, not using drugs like they used to, you really start to see a different turn in the way the team takes an approach. They take ownership, and they show a lot of love and respect for everybody on that team, and everything starts to clean itself up, and then everybody's happy. So it takes work, but I encourage you to stay focused and really try to buy into it. Have an open mind.
So we have a couple of questions. We think we have just a few minutes to answer a few of those things. The first one is regarding keeping the trust of the client and the general lack of, sometimes the lack of trust between a client and the officers. And I think that's another very, very important thing that outreach and putting outreach with law enforcement and social workers is that we will serve as the bridge between law enforcement and the client. So, you know, we stay in our lanes. We're not police. We're not trying to be police officers. We're not trying to have police officers be social workers. But we can actually be the bridge that a client needs to be able to talk to a law enforcement officer, to develop that trust with them, because they know that we have already established that relationship with the officer. And I think Sergeant Ponder is a great example of that, in that many times Victor and the team will, you know, put he and a client together so that that client can talk about the things that are only really privy for a law enforcement officer to hear.
And I think it's important to also back that up with, you have to let your client know what the boundary is. So we have our forum called Clients' Rights, and confidentiality is there, and there's a boundary that we set. So it's one of those things that we tell the kids, if you tell us you did it, you know, we have to be real careful that counseling laws are going to kick in. And so we have to make sure that we set the tone with the kids from the beginning about what we talk about and what we don't.
Right, and that was another question that someone asked about those protocols and policies, and those are things that we have developed in the office. Here we had our legal department look at it, and so we have established our own protocols and policies of what a client can tell us and what we know we have to let law enforcement know about.
Outreach workers being harmed. This is why it's so important that we stay in our lane. You can't overextend yourself to find out something that's happening in the community, because what will happen is that if you're not following your role and you start kind of dipping or extending yourself into another realm like an investigation, that's when you become a risk. Because if you're in something that you're not supposed to be in, it's one thing to support the kid through a process that he's going through in court, but it's another thing, unless you're trying to help the kid get away from something dangerous or to try to make a case for him, you have to be really careful with that. Because, again, these kids, I love them to death, but they lie, they don't tell the truth. And when you start getting involved in situations where they try to use you as an alibi, or they told you something in confidence and then you have to tell it because an officer comes back and asks for a report because you told them that a client told an outreach worker that you did tell them, who do you think the officer's going to come talk to when it's brought up in an interview? So the way you stay out of that from the outreach worker side is to be very careful what you're involving yourself in. Stick to the role of the outreach worker. Do not involve yourself in anything else with the DA's office, with investigation, homicide, or patrol. Stay out of the way. Get out of the way. There's other ways to be able to bridge that gap, but you have to talk about these in the intervention team. That's where that kind of smooth things over and helps.
So I think that may be all we have time for Q&A. We're going to turn it back over to Nina now.
And I'm going to turn it over to Carissa for final comments.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. So just a couple of quick reminders. We would appreciate if everyone could please take 5 minutes to complete the feedback survey. In addition, this webinar will be archived on OJDP's online university in approximately 3 weeks. if you guys want to refer back to it. This slide includes our standard webinar disclaimer if you want to take a look. Also, for more information, please feel free to contact OJDP, MTAC, or MGC. We ask that you please click the link to complete the feedback survey, and then thank you again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.